Thanks for joining today's seminar at the Ingenio seminar series here in the cloud. Hello. Well, today we're very lucky to have Itziar Castelló as a speaker. Itziar, as many of you know very well, is a very good friend of Ingenio, but she's also a prominent scholar in management and business. And well, she's had the generosity to want to share with us a piece of her work that is not published and hasn't been presented yet. So it's very premium, and she's also had the generosity of distributing the paper to all of us beforehand. Itziar, for those of you who haven't met her yet, is an associate professor at the Center of Digital Economy at Surrey Business School in Surrey University in the UK. And she's been there for a few years, but before she held academic positions at the Copenhagen Business School and at Carlos III University in Madrid. She has also worked in business and for business, so she has experience in the field. She researches now, and she's been researching for quite some years at the moment. She's working on digital transitions and digital economy. She teaches social ethical responsibility in companies and strategy amongst other subjects. And what she's going to share with us her current lines of research, I guess, herself. So thank you very much for this time you're sharing with us today, Itziar. And the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Carolina, for inviting me to present here at Ingenio that I always felt as home. Let me share my screen and I'll start my presentation. Thank you everybody also to come to this talk. I would like to make this call more a conversation. So I'll talk for 20 to 25 minutes and then we can open the floor and Carolina will moderate. Let me share my screen with you and so I can start presenting. Okay, let me know if you cannot see the presentation now, but I assume you can, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, fantastic. So I wanted to start this presentation, of course, thanking and showing my gratitude to Carolina and to Ingenio for inviting me to present this paper. My research interest and my research has always been more related to stakeholder engagement and the political role of the firm. Now I'm entering in the analysis of the dark side of digitalization, power dynamics, fake news, always through this analytical lens of institutional persuasion, discourses of legitimacy and emotions. But the field of policy, it's quite new to me. I've been doing some things with David Barbera about patents and engineers that develop innovations, but on policy, this is my first paper. So I'm very, very glad to be with the experts, and I'm really looking forward to your comments because I'm sure you will help me to place this paper to understand how to improve it and how to kind of push forward the key messages. So thank you very much again for giving me this opportunity to present here. And as any papers, I wanted to start this presentation giving you a little bit the story of how this paper was born, and acknowledging some people that have helped me a lot. And so this paper, this is why I started this thing on policy and on artificial intelligence, started 1.5 years ago when my colleague Christian Fieseler, who's one of the co-authors of this paper, approached me in one conference and asked me if I wanted to join the preparation of a grant on algorithmic accountability for the Research Council of Norway. And I say, okay, fine, let's do it. Why not? I think the topic is very interesting, so why not? And so we started to develop the grant application. We sent it, I forgot about it. And then half a year later, I think it was about December or so, I received an email from Christian saying, hi, here, we've got 1 million euros, so we have to do something with it now. And I was like, whoa, so pleased. Okay, but now we had to write something about policy and algorithmic accountability. So we started to work with him and with other colleagues at BA, Eliane, Bucher mainly, and I started to look at, okay, what can we say about that, right? And because for me, that was such a new field. I was looking for inspiration. And one of the first inspirations I got is because I had the chance to meet Carlota Perez through Stelvia Matos and who I think they are in the talk, so thank you for coming. And she started to talk to me about social contracts, golden ages of technology, very inspiring frame to a paper. And then I remember especially a conversation that I had with Paula and David, members of Ingenio, of course, and David especially is always the biggest inspiration for my papers. And they were telling me about their work on RRI and social innovation. And I thought that was fascinating. So I thought, okay, why not? Why not link artificial intelligence policies to what is happening in the evolution of the social contract of the science and technology, and to understand basically how to promote a socially oriented technology, and in our case, artificial intelligence, the policy. So this is mainly the main motivation and the key question that I wanted to discuss with you, and I wanted to debate with you today. So how to promote a socially oriented technology, and the case of artificial intelligence, which is one of the most prominent and probably interesting technologies that we are living through now, so through the lenses of policy. And more concretely, I'm going to talk about the discursive tools of policymakers and how they can help us to define, promote, and persuade this new social orientation. And also, and as a ramification of that, the regulation of artificial intelligence, when and how. So these are the key questions of the talk. And basically, I'm just going to give you a couple of hints about the context. And I don't need to say much about the race for global supremacy on artificial intelligence. And so one of the important areas of thought in policy is how artificial intelligence is impacting the economy, right? And there's this white papers of the European Commission developing how the artificial intelligence has the potential to boost the technological and industrial capacity of Europe, and how do we have to prepare for the socioeconomic changes that AI is going to bring. And there is a second big debate that is very close to my interest, because I've always been researching, and I'm personally very interested on ethics and responsibilities. And on the artificial intelligence, the question is, what is the right path? What the new social contract between policymakers and artificial intelligence developers should be.
To interrupt you, Itziar, but the presentation is not moving. Is
not moving?
this intentional? Because we've only seen the first slide and some people are mentioning it in the chat.
I'm sorry, because I can see everything. So I'm going to share it again.
It's, oh, that's where you are. Okay.
I'm here, right? So
we didn't see the previous ones, just the.
You didn't see my star picture. That is this one.
No, we didn't see that.
Especially for David, Paula, and Carlota. Anyway, so that's a pity. So what should I do? Well, I've been talking through
No,
the.
it's okay. Now
okay.
we can.
So now I'm here. The problem is that you cannot see it in the presentation mode now, right?
Exactly. But it's all right. We see the content if you want to stay where you are.
Yeah. So maybe, So shall I try again or not? Yeah, shall I try again?
It's up to you if you want to go back to some of the content. It was clear if you want to show the slides.
No, just this. Can you see my slide of the path now?
Yes.
Yes. And now can you see the slide? Let me do this. Sorry.
No, it's not moving. So you're trying to share the whole screen.
Are you seeing something else now or not?
No.
Okay. So let's go to low technology.
The first time this happens, unfortunately.
So low technology. So it's better that at least you see these, right? So I was telling that kind of the first, very quickly, the first debate is about how artificial intelligence is going to impact the economy. The second debate, which I'm going to focus on, is what is the right path, right? What is the ethics of AI that we should develop? Because everybody knows that artificial intelligence can have very important social impact. So for policymakers, the important thing is to try to think about what are the values that should guide this artificial intelligence. And there's been enormous work about that. So because this is a seminar that I know there might be some students and some people interested in the literature, I'm putting some citations, so for you to have some references, the ones that we are using in the paper. So we started to look at the literature, right? And what the literature was showing us on ethics and artificial intelligence, right? And so we wanted to understand what's the debate on that. So the literature on ethics and technology, and more broadly the science and technology innovation policy, right, was talking about in relation to this new social contract is how since the beginning of this 21st century, there's been an evolution, right, or a reorientation on the social contract from a narrative very strongly focused on innovation to a narrative that reorients the social contract to caring for society. So that was in line with what Carlota was telling to me and what David and Paula are doing. So I was very interested on that. But what I thought, or what we saw, in fact, in the literature, is that most of the papers focus on defining the key constructs like responsible research and innovation, sustainability, etc. And there's a whole bunch of constructs that they define, and they define the frames and the policies, how they have evolved over time. There's some papers talking about discourse in the making, so how the different constructs translate into the inscription of strategies. And Garud and German, for example, talk about how the discourses on these sustainability policies can work as a transformation mechanism. But what I thought it was missing is the how, right? How these strategies persuade stakeholders to adopt the new values that the policies are defining, right? All these new principles in which technology should be developed, and especially in artificial intelligence. So our research question, and here I'm making a big theoretical jump, but because from the analysis of the literature in STI policy, then we start to think, oh, so how do we think about this process of persuasion and legitimation of a moral construct, right? And so we look at the literature of discourses of moral legitimacy and the moralization of markets and Fieseler and the institutional literature that is developed in the paper. I'm not going to go through this literature here, but this is, in fact, my literature, the one that I'm very familiarized with. But from this literature, we could understand a little bit more the mechanism. And the research question of the paper, though center on what moral legitimacy strategies are developed in STI policies to promote the new social contract oriented towards society. So that was what we started to investigate. And what we did is we look at the national strategies on artificial intelligence in the European countries. In fact, we started broader, looking at as many as we could in very different countries from Canada to Japan. But then we decided to center in the European Union because we could see a pattern related to the values promoted by the European Union. So we look after filtering, etc. We have 22 national strategies, and we are taking these national artificial intelligence strategies documents as artifacts produced by thinking and speaking agents who generate and deliberate about ideas through discursive interactions and led to collective actions. So that's the framework of analysis. So results. The findings of the paper are related to this moral legitimation of STI and how this is done. And so we've come with three main discursive strategies. One is outlining the moral domain in order to create new meaning. The second is promoting identification with values and technologies to stabilize meaning. And the third is create the emotional tension between fear and hope to promote enactment. So with this, we see that there is this cognitive elements to the discursive strategies, but there is also this emotion. And this is one of the first things that strike to us is like these policy documents are super emotional, right? So they try to convince us very strongly about something. So this is the other element that we thought it was very interesting. Let me show you, this is the data structure, right? All the details about it if you're interested later on. And let me show you some findings quickly, right? So first, what we notice is that these documents, these policy documents, were very focused on defining the values, and that we call outlining the moral domain in order to create this new meaning of what is the good AI. And so they were talking about the values, human centricity, accountability, non-discrimination, and here respect for privacy. For example, and this is, for example, the Belgium example. But they were also talking about who are the responsible actors in order to kind of implement these values. For example, in the German case, they were talking about the German Research Center for Artificial Intelligence, right? So they were this definition of moral values, the moral principles, and the assignment of responsibilities, which is very much in line with the literature, right? The second thing that we saw is that there were many sentences that were promoting the identification with these values and the technology that we thought were very good in order to stabilize the meaning in the group, right? So we saw how these policy documents were drawing on cultural references. For example, the Danish policy said that The government considers it crucial that Danes continue to feel secure and to be confident and to use artificial intelligence will center on our shared values, right? So it's all about the sharing values and being in the community with cultural reference to share values that people relate to, right? But at the same time, they were also normalizing the technology and saying, for example, in the case of Finland, today artificial intelligence is already part of our daily lives. Our chats are answered by robots. We ask our phone Siri for advice. So they were also trying to normalize it, to make it part of the way we live together and feel and make us all feel part of this community, that we share some commonalities, but we share also the fact that the technology is there around, right? And finally, what we found very interesting was that they were also creating this sense of fear. And for example, saying privacy can be violated if the processing of personal data does not meet the requirements of propriety and transparency. And this is the policy in the Netherlands. But at the same time, these same policies, they were also creating a sense of hope, right? Saying, for example, the Belgian one, artificial intelligence set us free, granting us more time for the things that we define our humanness, that define our humanness, right? So there was, again, this creation of fear. If you don't do it properly, it will be terrible. So privacy will be violated. But at the same time, artificial intelligence can also be something like liberating in a way, right? So basically, this is our finding. So again, this framework, and let me tell you briefly about how do we think this contributes, right? So we think contributes first to the STI policy debate on the new social contract discourses, right? So what we argue is that when highly transformative technologies such as AI have the potential to pose risk for society, a new social contract needs to be negotiated, but not only through a discussion about the moral direction, and the terms that form the bodies of knowledge. So it's not only about the creation of knowledge, like the literature establishes right now, but it's also about creating this more complex discursive apparatus that promote the creation of identification and the emotional attachment. And so what we argue is that the objective of these discursive strategies is not only to create plurality, to embrace a larger public discourse and to join the ethical debates, as, for example, Flink and Callaway argue, between science and technology, but to create, we think that what they are doing is to create a deeper sense of engagement of the people with policies, right? So this is our kind of first main contribution. The second contribution is for this literature on the moral legitimacy discourses. And what we argue we contribute there is that legitimating strategies are, in the literature, are argued to be constituted by cognitive mechanisms of social ordering, such, for example, defining moral principles as examples. Haidt talks a lot about that, or responsibilizing actors for the development of technology, or normalizing the technology. What we argue is that the legitimation of the new social contracts also requires for this emotional strategy constituted by the tension between fear and hope, that it's able to promote the enactment of meaning, right? So this is what we contribute to this literature, and basically we explain how connecting emotionally may provide institutional actors with power to construct grievances and motivate collective action, as they activate emotional connections people have with the moral values. So we are also kind of joining the conversation of how moral values can be activated. And finally, to a broader debate on policy of AI, we think we contribute to this debate first, in arguing about the importance to reduce the vagueness of stating ethical principles in policy documents, because again, we found like how this policy, that this debate is all about what are the ethical principles that should be there, but we find this like, okay, we have this, but we need to understand how it's not only about the principles, but about how the implementation has to be done, right, in a way, or how to convince people more, right? So avoid the vagueness of stating ethical principles in policy documents and avoid the fears of ethics washing, right? So if you only state the ethical principles without convincing people, yeah, then you have this danger of ethics washing, like greenwashing, right? Then, and the second point is on when to regulate on technology, right? So we contribute to the understanding of how policy makers prepare the ground and negotiate this new social contract with the key stakeholders, and as suggested by Stilgo with the artificial intelligence national policies, the government might not want to regulate at this point, but rather seek to steer developments in collaboration with the private sector. So basically what we are like trying to contribute here is in this debate about what are the challenges, especially of the European countries, in how to use these tools for negotiation and persuasion to be able to decide on the right moment to regulate, and therefore balance the benefits of regulation with the risk of undermining the public trust that exists in the innovation. So this is our paper. Thank you very much, and looking forward to receive your comments. Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing now so we can back to normal screen. Thank you, Carolina.
Thank you, Itziar. Thank you so much. Fascinating topic and right on time. So we have plenty of time for discussion, and welcome to the new joiners. And please go ahead and well, you can raise hands if you have a camera on, or just use the Zoom tools if you want to ask a question or make a comment. Carlota Perez has joined, and she's raised her hand. Your micro is off, Carlota. Welcome to this forum. We can't hear you at the moment.
But I listened to it all, of course. I was just not visible. I think this is a wonderful contribution. Perhaps, I don't know if it's my ignorance about this moral literature that exists, but you know that I've been trying for a long time to convince the green movement that instead of having guilt or fear as the things that should be moving people, we should have aspiration and hope. And, you know, it should be that a green way of living is a wonderful living. It's better than consumerism and all these things, rather than we're guilty, we've got to stop doing, you know, that sort of contrast between how you can mobilize huge numbers of people to adopt and to accept a new way of living and new regulations, because there will have to be regulations and all sorts of things that could be seen as obstacles. You know, today with all this COVID lockdown, we can look at it as we are protecting our fellow human beings, or we can look at it, the government is forcing us to stay home and destroying our lives. You know, everything can have the two things, and sometimes you need a little bit of both. But I think this paper in particular, treating AI, not necessarily green, is much more wide-ranging in its possibilities than just the AI. I mean, it's good that it was done around something which is less discussed, because of course AI is mainly fear. At the moment, people just fear the joblessness that could come, all the jobs that could be destroyed. And some tech fanatics, you know, will say, all we can do with AI, but there's very little discussion about all the wonderful things that could happen with AI in medicine. And I mean, there are dozens of things that AI can do that are good and that we could sort of bring out to the light so that people realize that we are moving towards a much higher productivity economy if we can use everything that ICT offers, including AI and robotics, which are being seen as the bad guys in a way by some people, or by the Davos people as the so-called 4.0 revolution, which I think, I happen to think that we are in the middle of the information revolution and that we are at the doorstep of a golden age. And all golden ages are based on what I now discover can be seen in a very nice way, are based on people feeling that it's morally right. It's a change from selfishness to sharing and generosity, to feeling that everybody should have it. If we think of the previous golden age, which is the mass production, we see that we had, after the Second World War, the welfare state and high taxes, and everybody agreed that there should be high taxes, and everybody agreed that welfare was okay. And that is not what people think now, and what they have been thinking all this time when we had the early period of the information revolution. So I think this paper really makes a big contribution. I'm very excited about it. I'm very excited about being able to use it for the whole idea of how do you construct a golden age. So I would like, I mean, do you feel it's, when you were working on it, Itziar, did you feel that you were actually working on a little space that could have very, very wide-ranging implications? Because
to me, I'm quite new to policy. So what I was feeling is that I was connecting to your discourse and the discourse of about the golden age and the transformation and the social contract. And this is why we decided to frame the paper there, in fact, because we saw that there's this conversation is very, I have to say, that maybe it's because I don't know the literature enough, but I was looking into research policy, all these journals that are specialized in policy, and I couldn't find lots of paper, right? And then when I was talking with Carolina, I was talking with a bit other people that are much more familiarized with this literature. I was hearing that there is a bit of debate, but not much yet, right? And so for me, what it was interesting is to link the problem of how do we go beyond just the statement of values, which for me is quite a dry strategy, with the thinking about the evolution of technology as Carlota, you are explaining, and this process of transitioning from crisis to golden ages. And I absolutely love that. So this is why we framed this paper on this stage, and also to talk to the STI policy paper. So this is what I can say. And I think for me, the important is how do we think, like, how do we see, how do we understand, or how we can help countries to promote a better technology in a way, and this social contract that it's emerging now in a more efficient way. So we're looking at these other literatures of discursive moral legitimation, how people have done it in other markets, and they do it with other institutions, helps a lot. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carlota, for insightful comments. Any other questions, comments? Well, while we wait, I might take the opportunity to, well, there were a couple of hands. I'll wait to give my comment later. Marie, hello.
Yes, hello. Thank you, Itziar, for your presentation. I completely agree. That's really interesting. I was just wondering, in terms of your data and what you were saying, do you see different levels of moral thinking? And in terms of, you see the national level, the European level, and maybe the international level if you're expanding your database. So is there also these kind of different levels used in terms of justifying the morals of AI?
Yeah, thank you, Marie. What I can only speak for what we have analyzed, and so what we saw is that looking at many countries at the beginning, we saw that there was this prevalence of imposing a moral domain or proposing a moral domain. So with the values, and of course the concrete values vary, and how much they are present in the strategies, they vary very much. Like I remember looking with Eliane and with Christian, that I think they are here as well. So if you want to say something more, Christian and Eliane, please jump in. But I remember looking at the India, the Turkish strategies, and they were much more, they were stating some values slightly, but they were very aggressive on how to lead in economic position. But then what we saw is that the European ones, they were very much aligned with the European position, the European Union position on what are the main values that should lead artificial intelligence, and how this relates to the core values of the European societies. So this is why we thought that we better concentrate on these ones, because it's true that maybe across the world, the prominence of the specific values and how they link it to cultural reference, the sense of identity, of collective identity, it's very much done in the European cases, but not so much in the Indian and other cases. And then within Europe, there is variation, and maybe we can do a second paper about that. Eliane was very keen on working more on the variation between countries and so on. I remember Portugal, for example, was very much aligning with the European Union, and Finland and Norway are very much saying, talking about their values more than the European values, right? So it really depends a bit, but we thought the European ones were quite homogeneous in the way they state the set of values. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yes, really perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. David Barbera had raised his hand as well. David?
Yeah, thank you, Carolina. And thank you, Itziar, for presenting this fantastic paper, so interesting, and for your very kind words. And yeah, I mean, I'm not definitely an expert in discursive strategies in innovation policy, but my feeling that is also that this is quite new. I mean, they are not, I mean, again, I'm not a super expert, but all these years trying to think and read and about innovation, I think this is exciting. So congratulations for that. So my very short question. So trying to apply this legitimacy framework, no, the discursive analysis for building legitimacy, these kind of ideas, and to technology, I was thinking, okay, you choose to frame it around moral legitimacy, but technology, I would say, is a lot about pragmatic legitimacy, you know, perfectly this kind of different constructs relating legitimacy, and there is normative legitimacy, which I think is a bit more confusing, not the difference between normative legitimacy and moral legitimacy, but pragmatic legitimacy, which is basically that something really works. It seems like important for technology, because I would say that the argument about innovation policy, technology policies that changes things and really works. So that's my only question. There are two related questions. So why do you choose moral legitimacy, or maybe legitimacy in a broader, and not legitimacy in a broader sense? And what about pragmatic legitimacy when you are dealing with technologies? Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you, David. And in fact, why did we choose moral legitimacy is because what we were amazed when we were reading from a very inductive process when we were reading these policy strategies is that they were trying to moralize us. So Eliane, my co-author, she was always saying, they try to convince us, they are moralizing us about the importance of going through these values. So the first literature I look at, thanks to David again, of course, was Fieseler and the moralization of markets, right? Because we had, it happens that David organized a reading, how do you call it, a reading group, and we read this book. And so for us, what it was interesting is the moralization process. But then I couldn't find a way to link it to this literature of Fieseler. So what I saw is that I could link it to this more institutional literature that looks at the discourses of legitimation, that also I know much better, by the way, right? So because what we were seeing is that what they want, what is striking, right? And maybe in these policy documents, many things happen. So I recognize that there is a lot of pragmacy as well, right? But what is interesting for the debate on ethics and AI is that they try to moralize us in this set of values. But the literature is only talking about the values. Which values has this policy? Which values has this other policy? Why this policy in Europe doesn't have this value, and why this policy in the US have this value, these other values? But what the literature was not considering is this process of these discursive strategies to convince us, right? And the literature of moral legitimacy could help us. So to your question, probably pragmatic legitimacy happens a lot. We choose to focus on moral legitimacy because that relates to the moral argument that we were interested. And why not legitimacy in general? Because we wanted to focus on values, because we thought that that was quite something distinctive, and because we wanted to link it to the debate on this evolution of the social contract. So I guess it's a choice of positioning. Thanks. Good.
Richard had a question.
Yeah, hi, Itziar. Thanks for the presentation. I have to say the presentation doesn't really do justice to just how much work is in the paper and how thoroughly worked through how such a great job you've done with the analysis of the documents and all the rest of it. I have one comment about the framing of the paper and one question. My comment about the framing of the paper is that I have a feeling that it's not yet quite found its positioning, in the sense that it starts as a kind of discourse analysis. You say it's a discourse analysis, but what actually, and in this sense, I think this is when you're talking about the social contract, you're talking about discourses in the sense of much more than just text. You're talking about technocracy, for example, as a discourse, and you bring in RRI and these things, which are discourses, or they are sub-discourses which have been trying to civilize or democratize, or whatever you want to call it, the discourse of technocracy, I would say. But it's also tightly bound up with discourses about capitalism and about economic growth. But then the actual body of the paper, you switch to actually almost, I had a vision of a cabal of policymakers sitting in a room in Brussels, constructing documents which were almost like, which are targeted at an audience. This is shifting the levels completely. And, my first question would be, what's the target of the audience? Who really reads? Who's going to be convinced? Or have their emotional attachment to AI shaped by a national level science policy. I mean, the readership of that is a bounded audience. But more to the point is that I think the paper does brilliantly, I think, in what it does, but then it calls what it does discursive tactics and discursive strategies. Discourses speak through policymakers. So the discourse of technology, from a discourse perspective, technocracy is speaking through those policymakers who are modulating in certain ways, but they didn't create any of that. That language and those signifiers and the social arrangements that will be produced by these kinds of policies are flowing through there. So that's one level of analysis which you start with. And then I think in the paper, you've got a really interesting sort of institutional sociological kind of analysis going on there about what is actually going on. Are policymakers actually strategizing? Are they really strategizing about how they sell something? And so we come down to a level that, to me, sounds almost like it's more bound up in things like marketing and it's almost like a propaganda exercise that you've identified. Now, I think the paper can't do both of those things at the same time, but probably you can do both things in two separate papers. That would be my comment. My question is, in the selection process, I found it really intriguing that you eliminated specific technology-focused policy documents, and you mentioned, I think, the governance of self-driving cars and these kinds of things, because this is the opposite of the approach in STS, which is you go for the controversy. And because you are interested in emotions, which I think is brilliant, and you've done a great job of bringing in the emotions and the moral stuff, it just seems to me like these documents are actually potentially really interesting because they focus on the topic where the emotions are likely to be strongest, where the controversy lies. You know, and as was described already, the believers and the non-believers and the different visions come around these controversial topics. So my question will be why you made that choice.
Yeah. Thank you, Richard. Fantastic comment. I feel that what you are saying is exactly what is happening in the paper, that we are starting with super interesting debate on how knowledge is created, right? And I was very interested, and you know more than me on that, but how these terms have been created, like, and I'm referring to sustainability, social innovation, RRI. So you say, well, these are not the policymakers who have created, maybe these are the scientists. I'm not sure, maybe it's so for me, that's very interesting to understand that there is a whole debate there. And then I'm going to, okay, persuasion, right? How the policymakers are like writing these documents in order to convince you that you should apply the values that they want in a way, right? I completely agree on that. There is this kind of jump on levels. And this is why I try to connect the framework on how meaning is created, because through persuasion, through this process of creating documents, talking about things, meaning is created. And so for me, it's a looping, for me, not for linguistics, right? It's a looping process, right? On people trying to convince you about something and the creation of knowledge. And so this is how I'm trying to connect both things, and maybe it's a too big of a jump and probably I have to do something. And there's another big jump that we haven't commented on yet, but I would love to have your view on that, is what are the implications for policy making, in fact, for regulating actually, right? And these are three big jumps, like, but I think it's interesting to connect these things, because knowledge is created partially through many things, but also through these documents, I think, right? And this is what I've been reading about. And and my only claim is that the analysis of these documents have been focusing on keywords, right? On what is the kind of the knowledge, right? Basically, what is the bulk of knowledge, right? And that is created, and the bodies of knowledge. Sorry, I couldn't find the word. But at the same time, I'm talking about this discursive strategy. So I definitely have to explain the relation better. And probably a reviewer, if we send it like that, or maybe we do something, but a reviewer will tell us exactly the same. So we'll have to change frame, which is, I think, is very legitimate. And so thank you very much. So we'll completely think about it. So maybe it's too ambitious in a way to start with the social contracts. I couldn't find papers on the discursive analysis in research policy and talking about policy, but maybe I have to go to another journal. So if anybody of you that you know much more than me about these things could send me an email if you know some papers in a good journal, that would be great. Thank you. And the second one, why excluding the technological one? Basically, the more technology-oriented policy. I agree that this will be very, very interesting to include those, but we thought that they were different. So for homogeneity purposes, so basic pragmatic reason, we just choose these ones. But probably it's very interesting to do an analysis on those ones also, right? Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, just to respond to that, I can imagine why you did it, but again, I think there's a tension with the idea of the discursive structures, because you see what happens, and in the paper it's beautifully portrayed how discourses of nationalism have to be brought into this thing to take ownership for it, for the local population or the local community of scientists and innovators or whatever. Why? This is really interesting, but it's again another question away from AI as a discourse that's being flowing through, that is in somehow trying to be modulated in a way to say that technocracy really cares about people. Technocracy is no longer soulless. It now has values. It always had values, but why are the values being put at the front? These are fantastic questions, which I think your paper almost shows the answers to, because you've just done such a brilliant job with the analysis and all of the categories that you developed. But I maybe trying to discuss or analyse this in one way or the other might be more simple.
That's true. Thank you.
But you know, these are my feelings and I agree with you. I was kind of wearing a reviewer's hat when I was reading the paper. So overall, I think it's a fantastic piece of work, and I really enjoyed reading it.
Thank you. No, thank you. That's super useful comments. Thank you.
We move on to Paula, who had raised her hand as well.
Hello. Thank you, Itziar. I love the paper and your work generally. So when listening to your presentation, I was wondering about who is participating in making these policy reports, so which actors of stakeholders, and mainly which is the intention of the policy report. I mean, there are strategies, but for example, in the European Union, some of these kind of strategies are recommended by getting funds from the European Commission. So, but other policy reports or studies maybe was delivered to gather stakeholders' different visions, because it's something that STI studies and RRI studies insist on. Are we searching for consensus? Because then we will have a different report, then if we are searching for reflecting diversity of opinions and of course values and moral intentions. So there is a question that maybe is not easy to answer, because probably most of the reports are not making this explicit, but it's connected with some of the literature we are reading, so maybe it's help of somehow for your work. And well, generally, I think, as was previously said, that is a very important contribution, because mapping the values and all the work you have done, the frame that I think is very useful for our work in RI, because it's true that the how people is persuading each other probably is not there, and is the big question, how to promote values where are not now, and which values, of course. So really interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paula. And for me, in fact, you know much better than me all these things. So I boomerang your question to you, because I really don't know how these documents are created and how whether they are looking for this stakeholder engagement and consensus process. I know the European Union does all these processes, right? And Annabel Gauer, the professor that works with me in the Center for Digital Economies at Surrey, she is a key actor on those processes. So I understand that there is this engagement process, and I love to know more about this. So this is something that we have to maybe acknowledge in the paper, but it's very interesting to understand really how these papers have been positioned. And Richard was talking about the discourse of the great nation that some of the policies develop, like we are going to be a grand nation and this is why we need to lead on AI, and we will be the best, and then we'll have the best, but with a good AI, right, with these values. So everything is linked together. So I love to know more, and maybe we can discuss about this separately, about how these policy papers are created, and maybe if we can say something about that, right? And how the policymakers, you talk with the policymakers. I haven't talked about, apart from my discussions with Annabel, I don't talk often with the policymakers, and how they like intentionally create these discourses, or how they and how they include the others. I think this is super interesting, and I think it's worth developing it more in further projects. So yeah, maybe we can do a joint project and about that one day. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm going to take my chance to make a comment before we run out of time. And well, my comment was a bit in line with Carlota's, and I was trying to make sense of my notes here, because I see a very big potential in your paper, a very big contribution, precisely in the sphere that you're most modest about, which is the policy sphere. So, well, I think as an economist, which is what I am, so I was going back to the traditional approach to policy, which tells us that, well, policy is there to fix problems. So we have certain goals to achieve, and that, you know, economic actors or social actors do not achieve by themselves. So the state is there to contribute to reach those goals, right? But what happens when those goals are not given, when the path to follow is not predetermined? This is explained by Mariana Mazzucato a lot better than me. So public purpose comes into the field of, well, what we need to think about. What is the goal? And so what is the path? Your slide on, you know, the path to follow illustrated this very well. So when the goal is to be defined by the state in connection with society, here comes the social contract, then there are things that have to be done. And you've created a framework to think about the steps there that I think is extremely interesting, which is what you say, creating new meaning. So this is one of the roles of the state, which we wouldn't conceive of years ago, stabilizing this meaning and promote enactment. I think this is brilliant. I mean, not for AI, but as a general framework to think of how does policy proceed when the goals are not given, when it is open, and it is the role of the state to produce those meanings and take society in that direction. It's exactly, I think, what Carlota was saying. It is mobilizing millions of people in one direction. So you're defining the direction. And if you're doing that, then talking about ethics and morality, I mean, you have to do it. There's no way to get out of it. So, well, summing up, I've loved the paper because it's made me think about all these things. So, and if I get the chance, I will be using it in other contexts, because I think it could be generalizable and it could be applied just to thinking about public policy in general, which is precisely what you said you didn't know about. So it's great. It's a good time.
Thank you. Yeah, for me, that's the interesting part, right, of the debate. How, although I have to say that this framework it comes very much from social movement theory and this legitimation of values. There's tons, and this is exactly what David and myself, we've been working for 10 years. So for me, it's natural to think about these things because the social movements have been doing that for many, many years. And the social movements that we've been analyzing, these crazy papers of plastic that we are developing, they talk very precisely about that as well. So in that sense, for me, the interesting thing is the combination of this knowledge with the policy and where is the level in which I can talk to policy. Because I definitely, with this paper, because it's in this framework of the, as I told you, this Norwegian Research Council project, this is what we wanted to do, talk to policymakers about ethics and AI in a different way. And so we are bringing these other frameworks from other literatures, right? The legitimacy, discourses of legitimacy, social movements. What is the right level for me? And so I'm very glad to hear from people that are in policy that this is kind of something new to the literature in a way, right? And so for me, the challenge of this paper is like trying to talk to policymakers, trying to talk to you in a way, right? And to people that are in institutes of technology and see if this is something useful or not. Yeah. So this is exactly the challenge.
Well, personally, I found it very useful, as I said. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, for me, since we are in Ingenio, and I know there's also people from other institutions, Carlota at the SPRU, and I think there's also Jeremy Hall at the SPRU. Maybe what it would be interesting is precisely what we were discussing now, to hear a little bit more, but there's also you guys in Ingenio, to understand how from policy institutes in a way, right? How we can promote the understanding of what is the way of convincing, or like how do we make artificial intelligence in this case, and technology and society in general, how do we make the developers and the key stakeholders, the apparatus, right, that produces and develops this technology, how do we ensure that through our work, they become more socially oriented, right? So, and maybe this is a question for you guys, how not only can this paper helps to that, but what are other ways of thinking that we can promote this link or this development? I don't know if my question is clear, maybe not so much.
Itziar, do you mind if I
just make a quick
please.
recommendation. I'm afraid I've run out of time, and that's an awesome question that requires a really long answer.
Okay.
In the short term, what I recommend you do is, why don't you come down to Sprue and give one of our Friday seminars and actually explicitly ask that question. I think it's really important. We can maybe do a little bit of a workshop around it or something like that. So,
thank you, Jeremy. Thank you for coming.
yes. Oh, my pleasure. This was really enjoyable. So let's do it again.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
Thanks for attending, Jeremy, and bye. But well, there's still a lot of people in the audience, and I think your question was, if I can summarize it, is what would be the role of institutes, research institutes like us, working on policy, innovation, and technology policy in that social contract you discuss in your paper. What is the position, and what role can they play in constructing that social contract? Is that right?
Yeah.
That'd be ideas.
To link it to the paper, because I thought that was the kind of the interest. And maybe, as Jeremy was saying, well, that's to be a question, right? But I thought that was ultimately kind of the conversation that this paper elicits, in a way, right? Like how policy can be more social in a way, right? And so I just defined some strategies, discursive strategies, but then thinking about how we in general are contributing to that, and if we are, and I guess all the projects that Paula and Richard are doing are very much related to that. So I guess, and also through this process of engagement that Paula was mentioning, right? So I thought all this was very interesting for me to reflect about how the policy apparatus and that we are in, or you guys are in now, right, in a way, creates these meanings and help us to develop a meaning, and how then in the specific technology of AI, how values are so important, and how do we need to think about values and what they mean, and how we can then transmit these values, because then there is this ethics wash or danger of ethics wash that it's also present all the time, right? So that's more like a general comment, and so, but I just wanted to end up a little bit with this in a way.
Pedro. Your micro is speaking at high speed. No, we can't listen to you properly. You're talking like a dwarf, high speed. If you want to write it down in the chat, if it's not working, we can maybe. And there's never mind, I will do it later. But there's a couple of questions in the chat that I hadn't caught yet.
Can you hear me now?
We can, yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. This happens a lot. The first time I connect to Zoom, it often happens. So I don't know why. I know we're already running out of time, so I just wanted to say a little bit about what the comment that Itziar, well, the question that Itziar asked. I'm not an expert on discourse or even on AI, but I have spent a lot of time thinking about policy, and I do think that and how to influence policy. And I do think that one of the big mistakes we make in the innovation, in general, the innovation research field, is that we tend to assume still nowadays that influencing policy is about finding the right language or finding the right report or finding the right research question. But then if you look at political science, I mean, they're quite clear. It's not about that. I mean, policy is about power. It's about politics, right? That's how you influence policy. And so really, I think the key thing we have to ask is, how do we mobilize people or institutions or groups of people who have similar interests, maybe in not necessarily working in policy, who could then, try to push policymakers to think in a different way? Because, I mean, on one side, you have big corporations, you have big corporations trying to make sure that policy is aligned with their interests. And their interests are very much about profit, market domination, etc. And on the other hand, we have, we individual people writing papers on, you need to find some sort of a counterbalance. And this will not be just about doing the right research or having the right method. This really is about mobilizing people. I don't know exactly how to do that, but it's a problem that I often find. People assume, oh, if only we bring policymakers into a room, into a seminar with them, this will change policy. It doesn't work like that.
That is very interesting comment, and so I think, and I completely agree with you, Pedro, and basically the work that we've been doing with David on understanding social movements and how they influence people is very much like that. So maybe there is now like a petition to open a new line of research in Ingenio related to social movements. David, that's your place also. Anyway. So, but I think that's very interesting, mixing this thinking and literature. That I think that's key to understand how to make things change. Yeah,
it's institutional entrepreneurship, David. If you want to say something, you're the expert.
Exactly.
Richard has raised his hand as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to alert Itziar to something that might be interesting, is that in a couple of months, I think it is, there's a new science and technology Eurobarometer going to go into the field. And the last draft that I saw of it, one of the technologies that they're asking people about, whether it's going to be good or bad or indifferent for their lives in the future, is AI. So you will actually have, at some point later this year, a really interesting regional and nationally sort of organised data set on public perception of AI, which might then enable you to do something else, connecting the public side with the policy side. I don't know. I just thought I'd mention it.
That's super interesting. Thank you. And I can see Christian here, which is my co-author, and so Christian will have to do something like that. Yeah.
Okay, well, we have 2 minutes before you have to move on to your next appointment, Itziar, and unfortunately we have to close this session. Thanks very much to you in particular for a fascinating discussion. Thanks to everybody who attended and made insightful comments and questions. And yeah, big clap. And hopefully we'll have future occasions in person to keep conversations with you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.